Okay, as you can see here, the quilt is in the quilting frame, hanging over the edge. I had a request to have a little bit of a discussion about the quilting frame. These are the handles that keep the quilt tight, and I have a tool to unloosen it. Actually two. I have this tool and this tool. The one goes over here on the nut, and I unloosen it from that side. And since this is an older frame, I have to also I bought this frame used, so the nut wants to spin, so I have this little wrench to hold this side while I unloosen this side. And after I unloosen that, I also will unloosen this little cog. I don't know if you can see it. I will unloosen this. I twist this and push this little arm up, and then this will roll freely. So that way I can roll from this side, roll the quilt this way. And also I have 6 of these little sliding bands that I attach to my quilt to hold this side of the quilt tighter. So when I roll it each time, I loosen up these little arms, and I loosen up this cog over here, and I roll it to the left. And then I retighten everything, and then I repin everything. I also have to take the pins out of here and repin everything. So this is what the quilting frame looks like. You can see the legs. It has crisscross bars on the bottom to hold it steady, and the tools go in this little space right here. That's where I hold the tools. There's a little hole right here to hold my little these little tools, or little wrenches. So I stick them back on there every time I use them, so I know where they're at. And that's pretty much it. I mean, it's not too difficult. So I also wanted to show you the different stencils that I'm using in my quilt. I think I showed them to you in my last video, but I wanted to go over it again. I have them stenciled in each of the blocks so that you can see them, and then I'm going to quilt them. As you can see, I have one of them done. So I hope this is helpful. This is the first one that I did. So you can see that. I'm going to continue to quilt. Maybe I should put it from this side, and you guys can see me quilting better. I wanted to start quilting in a ditch. Also, I started the stencil quilting, but I also like to have the ditch quilted. So, over here is where I was going to start from. And I stitch right in the ditch. I pull my needle through the middle of the fabrics and I get as close to the seam line as I can. And I just stitch a straight stitch along the ditch. Now there is fabric on the right side of this stitch, so it's where the seam is. And so I'm going to stitch more on the dark blue side because there's less fabric. The seam line is on the light blue side, which is the right. And it doesn't always end up that way. Sometimes when you move the quilt around, the seam line will move too. So you have to kind of adjust your stitches to where the seam line is not at. And sometimes I'll move from one side of the seam line to the other because the seam line has shifted when I move the fabric, like rolling it or just when I placed it on the quilting frame, you know, it may have shifted from the dark side to the lighter side. Even though you iron it to the dark side, it will shift when you're moving your fabric around. So that's just the way it goes sometimes. So you can see I'm halfway down the ditch. Now when I do my blocks, I tend to pick a pattern that fills up most of the blocks. You don't have to do that. You can just pick a pattern that you like, even if it doesn't fill the block up. Like some of these other patterns, there's less to them, so they don't quite fill the block, but that's fine. And if you want to fill the block, you can always add more stitching, like straight lines or whatever, to add to your quilting pattern. So it's up to you, but that is how I do it. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is when I piece this together, I have a little square piece right in here. So I'm just going to continue to go down the seam line on, usually I'll just go around the block, but since there's a square seam line here, I'm going to go down this seam line, which I might have to do it one stitch at a time because I feel the seam has separated into both sides. It has spread apart. So I have extra material on both sides. So there's not a true ditch. So as you can see, it's harder to quilt through, though I can do it. It's just a little bit difficult because there's extra fabric right there. But I'll show you. So I just like to have that stitched, and then it stands out a little bit more. And then I go through the center of the fabric and cut it off right there. Okay. Now I'm going to take that little short piece of thread out. I might use it on something else, but I'm going to get another piece of thread to start stitching on this other ditch. tie a knot in one side of the thread, like that, just a little knot. That way it will hold when I pull it through the fabric. So I'm going to stitch on this side of the ditch, on this side of the square seam line. Okay, so I anchor it down to start out with, and then I start stitching in the ditch. Use a little rocker motion that we call it. And now right here, you're gonna have more fabric. Right here. Right there where the corners meet, you always have more fabric. Sorry for the phone. I'm just gonna let the answering machine get it. Okay, so this is the ditch, and the fabric is pushed to the light side. So again, I'm stitching in the dark side. Okay. Here's the camera. You do have to watch when you have your pins here until you roll it the first time. Sometimes I'll push them back down through because they stick up and I will get jabbed with them. So I didn't do that when I put them in, and so they're sticking up. But if you take and push them down through, that way you're less likely to get jabbed while you're sewing the edge of your quilt. So it can be a little bit hazardous. As you can see, sometimes I push my quilt up a little bit higher to get a hold of that. Okay, so I think I'll continue on stitching in the ditch. This is a little bit harder too because this fabric is thicker and it's kind of pushed over into the light side where the ditch should be. So it's a little bit harder to push your needle through because there's so much fabric there. So it takes me a little bit, like I go a little bit slower because there's a little bit more fabric there, and then being as it's thicker fabric, it just makes it a little bit more difficult. That's why I don't always work with these thicker, fuzzier fabrics because they're just a little bit harder to quilt with. They make the quilt nice, especially for children, because they have, well, anybody really. I like the soft fabrics. So it makes it, you know, a little bit soft. I added this extra piece here because I needed a little bit more length to it. So on both sides, I put an addition on here just to fill that space in so that it would come out evenly. As you can see, it's a little bit bigger than my other blocks. So, but I figure, you know, I have to add it in somewhere. I had already cut all the other blocks, so I just added a piece in. So sometimes you can do that. You have to piece it in somewhere just to get your length. So that's what you're seeing right there. So, okay, I'm gonna keep quilting here. Sorry, I keep putting my finger across the camera lens. I'm going to keep quilting here, and you guys keep quilting and have fun doing it.